So let me share my slides with you. Okay, I'll start from the beginning. So this focus is on the system change updates from people and communities working within Telford and Wrekin. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's focused on July to September, but then it also looks forward between October and December. But because this work is moving, lots of momentum, there are further updates from what we'll see on the screen. So let me take you through those. So for those who just need reminding, or those new to the work, we're focused on within the borough aspiration and unlocking potential. And it's important to remind you that this is not Lloyds Bank Foundation work. This is Lloyds Bank Foundation being in the borough, helping those who want to make real change within aspiration and unlocking potential, how we can collectively achieve our outcomes. So it's not our work, it's all of us's work to do that. So we can provide resources and extra assistance to get to that vision. So the vision is for people of all ages to reach their potential in life. And we framed it around the 2 Marmot principles. So the social determinants of health, and that's everyone reaching their capability, and good and fair employment for all. So it kind of sits quite neatly on what often is a shared ambition across the borough, business, private, public, community sector would all recognise those Marmot principles. So the change we want to see happen, we want to influence or collectively act upon change or identify change that leads to significant difference within communities. So it needs to be led by or alongside people impacted by services, whether that's people who are seeking work, people in employment, people in education, people wanting education, improved skills in later life, designing and delivering the change that they want to see happen. So this isn't about individual businesses saying, if only I had this extra bit of funding, we could do that and that. It's about saying, actually, how can we evidence where we're going to have the biggest impact? Who's doing that already? Maybe we can support them. Or it can also mean, you know, where not just where we can have the biggest impact, but it might be that there's a gap and there isn't anybody working in that space. How do we fill that gap? So how are we doing it? We've got an employer group, which is focused on improving access to good and fair employment. That has now 12 employers on it. So that's great. So their focus is on improving access to good and fair employment. So I'll give you an update where they're at the moment. We've also got a newly formed employment group focused on influencing change for those furthest from the job market. And that's been really important in the decision we've made over the last 3 months to have 2 groups. Because the employer group, and there's a lot of funding that helps and support employer group engage with and recruit people into the workplace. But a lot of DWP funding over the years has been trying to target those furthest away from the job market, nearer to the job market. So employers will probably, with all the best will in the world, still only be employing those nearest to the job market and removing some of the barriers that prevent them from gaining work, but probably not focused on those with the most complex issues being work ready in order to gain employment. So we've got 2 different focused groups within employment. And then we've got an education group seeking to influence and collectively act on change in local education provision and ensuring that the health and well-being of the learner is at the heart of any local strategy. That's their working group vision. And then we're also, alongside that, strengthening the local community sector infrastructure. We recognise that any gaps in provision or where we need to bolster provision is probably going to be in the community sector, even with cross-sector engagement. Often public sector services and funding are retracting, and it's where we can pick up and bolster the community sector to try and pick up some of those gaps and spaces that have been left behind, because people still need those services. So who's involved? Well, it's very cross-sector. We've got public sector organisations involved in the work. The DWP and the local authority are engaged in the employment discussions, and as the way we can hear from Paul today, we've got the that's quite broad as well. We've got 12 different employers engaged in those conversations, and we're making significant progress already achieved in working with Telford College, Education Strategic Leads, and Telford and Wrekin Council. In addition, commissioners are getting more and more engaged in the work that we're doing, and we've had a dedicated meeting with commissioners recently, which has shown some promising results, and them saying actually that they want to look at alternative ways to commission. So that's great to hear. Community organisations, I think our representation now is quite high from a range of diverse community groups in 2 focused themes, particularly around strengthening the community sector. But we've also got diversity of organisations involved in both the education and the employment discussions. And people, we are currently designing a model that connects local people and groups to decisions, planning and delivery within, again, both themes. And this should be informed by some EDI work that we've been undertaking, and I'll share that with you in a moment. And we've also got much broader now representation from, I'm going to say, the private or the employer sector, because in our employment group of employers, they are themselves cross-sector. So we've got employers from the community sector there, the public sector, and the private sector. So we're really getting people involved now in the conversation about unlocking potential and through those different themes. And then what I usually show at the bottom is just where we've had more enhanced conversations over the last 3 months, or new conversations. So we met with Becky Proctor, the Senior Health Improvement Practitioner for Telford and Wrekin Council, had a really useful meeting with Natalie Bevan, who's SEND Service Delivery Manager. Some really exciting things happening at Telford Theatre. So we had a meeting with John Bilston and Debbie King about some of the work there and how it can get better engagement programme with the community. We also met with the new chair of the Nigerian community group. And we've also I attended a meeting with the Elevate group over at Hazeldine House, young people who are neurodivergent, thinking about their experiences within education and employment, and how their experiences can help shape better services for others in the community. So a bit of a heavy slide now, but I'm going to take you through those. I'm going to tell you what we've been doing in the last quarter and why we did it, why we're doing it. And then I shall tell you what's happening in the next quarter. So in the last quarter, as I remind you, was that July, August, September, we held 2 meetings of the employer group. And in those groups, we used the principles of logic modelling to determine vision and to understand what the group needed to understand. And the reason we did that is we wanted to make sure that creating good and fair employment was what employers want. And in order to work out where to start, where they could influence, what they needed to prioritise, the group needed to identify what they needed to understand. What data did they want to know? What quality of data did they want to know? Who did they want to speak to and engage in order to determine where they wanted to start? So it assists in determining an informed starting point with the employer's vision of creating good and fair employment within the borough. So what that's resulted in is a piece of research going to happen within the borough. So we are at the point right now of just finalising what that piece of research looks like and ready for invitation to quote. So that will be a significant piece of research that will look at the barriers faced to gaining good and fair employment. That will then go to the employer group, who will look at that, interpret it, and make decisions about what it's telling them and where they can have the biggest influence. So that's underway and will be released soon for people to tender for it. We held 2 meetings of the new formed education group, where we undertook some maturity matrix work, and we just discussed a recent BBC report on education in Telford. Jim, I know you came to that. And the reason we held that was to understand how capable a system is of achieving continuous improvement. The maturity matrix helps us think about where is the system at the moment? Are we all engaged in a joint strategy for education in the borough? Are we working collaboratively to achieve that? And we were discussing all of that. I've got a report on it if somebody wants to read it. There were some really interesting conversations around that, and thinking about where we're at, what we need, what we still need to do. And also with the education group, it ties really well with the EDI work that we are currently commissioning. And that is focused on education in the borough. I received the first draft of the report on Friday. It leads to some really interesting reading about some of the disparities and some of the data that hopefully we can share with education providers in the area, with those who are interested in reducing barriers within education within Telford and Wrekin through an EDI lens. I don't think we're completely there in the first wave of the data, but we will be holding a meeting on the 6th of November where we will share the results of that data, and probably can hope to get to a point where, just like the employer group, we know where we might be able to have the biggest influence in improving education for everyone in the borough. So that's been an exciting moment, and I had a meeting with the people who carried out that research this morning, and it all sounds very exciting. There's a few shocks in the report, and a few areas where we might be thinking, well, if that's happening, why is it resulting in that? So there's lots of questions we might be wanting to be asked of that data. So as I say, I send out invites, but it's going to be discussed on the 6th of November. So we formed an additional employment group. I just touched on that earlier, that will focus on identifying where change could happen or be influenced for those furthest from the job market. When you read about DWP targeting of national funding and whether it's really moved people from the furthest away from the job market nearer to it, evidence suggests that that doesn't normally happen, or those outcomes are not always reached, and that money gets spent on those nearest to the job market. So a really good opportunity there to try and influence some change. And the reason we've been formed that additional group is to ensure that we identify the needs, challenges and opportunities to assist those furthest from the job market to have access to good and fair employment. We've continued to support COG by co-hosting Strengthen the Community Sector events and providing 2 Lloyds Bank Foundation infrastructure grants. Really pleased with that. 3 pieces of research you'll see has been happening. One is around employment, one is around education, and one is around infrastructure. So those 2 grants, the first one, we've already put out to tender, and we will soon announce who's been in receipt of that tender. We'll look at how we can strengthen the community sector in Telford and Wrekin and put forward some recommendations. The other grant has been able to provide an additional resource for COG, doing all the administrative and coordination role, so that those who are leading COG can give their time to strategic planning. So giving that extra resource for a period of a year. Attended a funded resilience programme with other local organisations. So some of you will know about this, and some of you won't. We recognise that the community sector needs to be more resilient in Telford and Wrekin. So 11 organisations from Telford are on a programme, organisation resilience programme, and they are also looking at opportunities to work with local commissioners. So they've brought kind of a piece of work back to Telford from being on that programme, and their piece of work, their project, is to identify opportunities, gaps and challenges in the commissioning of local services and explore how we might work collaboratively in this area. So I'm supporting that group, providing them, you know, my role when they held a meeting a couple of weeks ago with commissioners locally, and my role was to contact the commissioners to come along, and we had 7 commissioners come along from Telford and Wrekin Council, willing to engage with this working group from the community about how we improve commissioning in the borough. I think there'll be some really interesting learning coming out of that. We did hold an online diverse voices workshop, seemed so long ago now, and it was coming together of stakeholders keen to raise aspiration, unlock potential within the borough, particularly from a diverse lens, to understand what's going well, what we could do more of. So that was really useful. We've been we've completed our pilot of community resource forums, response forums. I often describe this as the Dragon's Den without the money. It's a group of community network people who are on a panel, and anyone starting up or at crossroads within their community organisation can come to that panel and get some just guidance, signposting from a group of people who are well networked in the community. And it allows people to test approaches for support to grassroots organisations. I would say it's been a real opportunity to meet a diverse range of organisations across Telford, organisations we probably wouldn't have met before. It was also meant that they've come closer to the work around infrastructure, education and employment. We held a visioning event that looked out and imagined what 2029 could look like. And within that, we discussed what good employment could look like, who needs to be in the education discussions, and how we strengthen the community sector. And it gives an opportunity to set a long-term vision probably for the next 5 years, I would say. And for anybody who was there, I know there was a few of you there, the progress there has meant meeting again with Lloyds Bank Foundation team to see if there's any of those areas they can help fund and resource that so they could be what's the word I'm saying, escalated, so that they could move a bit quicker. So what would we do in this year? What would we do in the next follow-on 2 years, and then the next few years? So putting everything in a programme of activity, and whether it needs a little bit more resourcing, funding or help from Lloyds Bank Foundation. So it will have something really positive to share, a bit of a journey that I can share with people relatively quickly now. I think it'll be soon finished. And the Community Explorer is supported by Terry Arnold, who visited and engaged with community groups. That's now ended, but it's provided valuable insight into the next phase of the work. And the next phase of the work, again, quite exciting, I think, is to inform and influence a collaboration approach. So what happened there was we had a group of community organisations who were saying in Telford and Wrekin, we haven't got really a good space to share intelligence across sectors, to find out who's running events, to find out if people have got data that they could share, to find out if there's some shared intelligence that could be extracted from something. So it's a shared intelligence platform that people have been asking for, but it's face-to-face. So we did meet last week with those different partners with a proposal to test the approach taken by the community resource team in the wider county of Shropshire, and to trial a couple of those community connectors events in Telford to see if it's the right model for the partners. So that's what we're doing. We're just putting a figure together about how much that would cost to have those two test events. They'll be one will be face to face, one of them will be online, and they're likely to happen in the new year. So again, that'll be shared intelligence approach, and it's possible that if we get it right, it will either be under the umbrella of COG and the infrastructure system, or it could be something that the community resource team can access funding for to run across Telford. Don't know where it's going to go yet, but it's worth starting it. And that group, we're really keen to start piloting an approach to this. And just to kind of share with you some words from the last quarter and the events I've been talking about, I've particularly picked out some extracts here. This came from 2 emails that I received after the 2029 visioning event, and I thought they were worth sharing. So the first was, I didn't feel anyone with hidden agendas on the table I was sitting on. You also didn't have the usual suspects that talk over everyone and attend all meetings. It was very refreshing. And as I say, that was about the 3rd of September event. And this was another one from the 3rd of September event where about 29 organisations came together. And I kind of really like this one at the bottom. This is what it should all be about. If you can pull the sector together without a promise of funding, I think you can do great things. And when I was chatting to them later, they said, we only get usually this amount of people at an event when there's funding on the table. I can't believe you pulled them together without that promise. So maybe if we quote Councillor Ray Evans, when she said to me, the reason I like this work that we're undertaking now in the borough is it looks at the issues before the solutions. And I think that's why people do want to come around the table, because they want to talk about the real issues before we find out how we can meet them. And often it's funding that drives new initiatives, but we want to get to the core of the issue and then seek the funding for it. So what are we doing over the next 3 months? Some of that we've already started. We want to support that group who are that employers group, of which Paul is a part of. We want to undertake that research, that community study about why people aren't gaining good and fair employment in the borough and what we need to action and do. So as I say, that's just ready to be going out to tender. So that's quite exciting. To support the newly formed cross-sector employment group, so that's the one looking at people the furthest away from the job market. They've met once, and we're hoping that we have got an opportunity to apply for some funding for that group, where if we can identify where we can really influence change around work readiness support, then we might be able to gain some funding from it through the Lloyds Bank Foundation National Influencing Programme. So we're starting some meetings around that to say, actually, can we identify what we can influence around work readiness? And if we can, then we can start putting together an application to gain that funding for that piece of work. So we've got some meetings around those happening if people want to know more about that. We want to work with the education work, and the next step will be to take that research that I mentioned that I was looking at this morning with the people undertaking the work. Really exciting research. I think they've picked out some really interesting recommendations for the borough around equality in education and seeing what we can take forward there. And we are looking at how we undertake community-led action. And what that means is we are going to work with Burns Livingston to contact people who are engaged in our work already across the borough and find out how they feel about whether they feel included. So often our events, we look diverse, and we've certainly got a representation of diversity in our events. But are the people coming still facing barriers to attending our events and our activity? And can we learn and improve from that? So that we're going to have a look at that work. I've done a little bit already, which has highlighted some really interesting responses about how we can improve equity within our meetings and how we can help young people, parents become more engaged in our work. So that's really helpful. We'll continue to meet with cross-sector community leads. So I've got a meeting at the end of the month with Councillor Lee Carter and 2 other council leads. I'm going along with some of our lived experience groups to meet with them and talk to them about a new way of working and collaborating and involving and engaging people within the community. So that's really interesting. And then a really positive outcome last week, I think, or the week before, with the Telford Business Board. If we really want to get employers on board with creating good and fair employment for all in the borough, then where better for this to be sat or led or supported but the Telford Business Board, who themselves are a CIC. Had a really promising meeting with them, and what we're looking at is developing a framework that employers in the borough could work towards, and I'm presenting that in December back to the Telford Business Board. And that's quite exciting because it means that as the employment group develop strategy and approaches that can be shared with the Business Board, it also means that if the employment group themselves want to access funding for whatever they want to do around employment, and we're looking for someone to hold that money, and maybe it's only open to community groups, well, in fact, the Business Board could go for that money, hold that money, and then the employment group could undertake the work. So it opens up lots of different opportunities. We want to continue supporting the commissioners' work and their outcomes. I did have an email from one of the commissioners who attended the commissioners' meeting. There's a picture there. It was a nice tight group of people working with some of those commissioners. And they contacted me to say how much they really enjoyed the discussions and the planning, and that they would now like, I don't know why me, but to go along to a Telford and Wrekin Commissioners event and to present a new way of working, or the approaches to bold commissioning. So that was a positive outcome coming out of that discussion. And that group image of there are also planning to meet again in November to discuss how we can improve commissioning in the borough. And progress the work with cross-sector partners, so thinking about how we share that intelligence with the community explorers, and to continue to oversee the organisation resilience work. That's the 11 organisations on that programme. To carry on to work with COG, although they're holding a lot of it now themselves, and I'm there just to support them, and to further development of the COG subgroup within the Circle platform. So some of you will be already subscribers to our Telford and Wrekin collaboration platform. It's online, where you can share news from your own organisation on there, and you can see updates as things are happening within the work that we're undertaking within Telford and Wrekin as well. If you're not already on it, there is 98 organisations on there now, and COG is going to have a subgroup of that platform where they can share their own information as well. And I guess at some point we'll probably create other subgroups as well. So just some headings, highlights, challenges. I've been learning a lot about sociocracy, and it's a way of creating consensus in shaping services. The risk sometimes is the loudest voice gets heard, and we get pulled away. So if I give you an example of that, in the employers group, we had a visit from the DWP talking to us about where they saw some of the barriers within employment in the borough. And the risk is that you can be drawn into what they think is the priority. So we need to make sure that all the employers buy into it, and it's what they want to achieve, not where somebody's trying to pull us. So it's making sure that we test everything that we want to do, and we work together to identify where we will make a real change in employment practices. We are investing in research, so I think that's been a big change over the last quarter. So we're seeing those pockets of investment. The employment work could lead to a further £40,000 worth of research to be carried out in the borough, which not only helps us within the aspiration and unlocking potential work, but if they can find some really core data that helps every single one of the organisations here today about how they can use that data in their own funding bids, then that means that that piece of work and research ripples out further than just the unlocking potential work. We're building on our own work. The Community Explorers, led by Terry, did some great work, and now it's influencing the Community Connectors work. And similarly, the organisation resilience work is now leading to a commissioners conversation. So this work is being owned across the borough. It kind of feels less like my work, less like Lloyd's work, and me providing support and resource to others. In education, the steering group have decided that alongside trying to influence current education strategic partner groups, they're going to form their own group and their own actions for change. That's come about because where I've met the biggest barriers, I think, in this work is, and perhaps reminds us why relationships are so important. It's been great to work with the community infrastructure work. There's been a real willingness to make changes to strengthen the community infrastructure. There's been a real commitment with the employment work for employers to get in that space and to start thinking about the changes they can influence. What's been harder is the education sector, because often the education sector and those who set strategic visions for education do it within the public sector, even though they're saying they're working with partners on a strategic level. When you read in, it's really hard to find a community partner that's at the strategic level. And that's been really hard. And we've spent probably 2 years trying to crack that. And we're just making some moves. We've got a meeting with the strategic partners next month. But we've decided we can't just keep waiting for them to invite us to the table. We also have to move forward education needs. We need to bring the community together to become a stronger voice around what needs to change within education and education support within the borough. So 2 pieces of work there. And then the 3rd of September event, it gave us a great opportunity to look at what we can be doing over the next 5 years, where we'll need additional support from Lloyds Bank Foundation. And I think we're pushing at an open door. I think Telford and Wrekin are, very advanced over the 6 regions that Lloyds Bank Foundation are investing in. And I think we often put up as a flagship. So therefore, they will be keen to support our priorities. And at the same time, I think they want us to crack on with anything we can. That was their phrase. And if you can see things you can crack on with and we can help, then let us know. So I think it's a really good time at the moment in this work. There seems like the relationships are there. There's trusting relationships, and now we can start to make this work really, really get some ground, some momentum. I just put some dates up there. On the Monday, 28th October, is the steering group meeting for Unlocking Potential, which is really about when we discuss where the work's going and where there's some sticking points. And then on the 29th of October, we'll be discussing the viability of applying for that collaborative funding bid I mentioned earlier. Wednesday, the 6th of November, we will be looking at that data that's come out, that EDI data, and having a closer look at it. Those meetings will be the first Wednesday of every month after that. The next employment group, which is those looking at those furthest from the job market, will be on the 7th of November, and from then on every first Thursday of the month. So getting some momentum there so we can crack on with activity and then see where we need extra resource to meet our priorities. The next employer group, as I mentioned earlier, 12 employers coming together. They'll be looking at some of the early research coming out of their work, will be on the 25th of November. We may, if we can squeeze it in, have a Connect and Celebrate event where we look at what we've achieved this year in the Unlocking Potential work. And that's mainly because often we don't stop, pause and reflect on what we've achieved over a period. And if we can do that, we can find a slot to do that, we will. Because often we just crack on and do the next thing, don't we? So time to pause, celebrate what's been achieved in a year. And then the trial of the Community Connect model, we expect to happen in early 2025 with a date to be confirmed. So that's everything. I am going to stop sharing. And I am, as long as you haven't, I'll stop recording. Okay. So I'm going to stop